my generation. But it hasn't been easy, and it's an interesting question, and I think you're right. It is in part.
Your brother's not happy with the book.
I believe that my brother is entitled to his privacy and his opinion, and I am completely supportive of whatever relationship he has with my family and whatever choices he makes. It's none of my business. This is entirely my doing. I didn't consult anybody. Nobody knew in my family. Nobody knew it was happening. I didn't feel that I needed to ask permission by any stretch of the imagination, but I didn't want to implicate anybody. This is my responsibility, and I believe very strongly that it's my obligation. But if other people don't feel that way, I completely respect that.
You do have one potentially explosive allegation in the book, at least one. Mm-hmm. And you write that when the president was trying to transfer from Fordham to Penn, mm-hmm. he had someone else, a man named Joe Shapiro, mm-hmm. take his SATs?
Yes.
This was 1964. How do you know that?
I've been told this by people in my family. I am absolutely confident that it's true. I'm happy to finally to be able to speak about it. I also know that it was not the Joe Shapiro people have been focusing on, who just happened to be at UPenn when Donald was, and who happened to be born in New York along, I'm guessing, with many, many, many other Joe Shapiros at around that time. But I stand by it. Absolutely.
So to be clear, it's not Pam Shriver. Pam Shriver, the widow of Joe Shapiro, has come out publicly and said he didn't meet Donald Trump until Penn. There's no way this is true.
Yes, and I feel terrible that she's been subjected to this. Honestly, I wish I could have said something sooner, but obviously I couldn't. I'm happy to now, and I absolutely stand by this story, and I think the only people other than me who can address it are other people in my family, and I look forward to hearing their response to that question.
How do you know it's true?
I trust my sources.
Is Joe Shapiro still alive?
That I don't know. I have no idea.
Have you ever met Joe Shapiro?
I have not.
So you believe in your sources. Mm-hmm. How do your sources know?
They were alive at the time, so they have firsthand knowledge of this.
And you believe other members of your family also know this is true?
Yes.
And Donald Trump knows it's true?
Yes.
White House says it's an absurd falsehood.
Of course they would. But the White House isn't Donald, and it isn't, and the press secretary for the White House does not represent my aunts and other uncle.
Can you prove it's true?
Can I prove? No, because I'm counting on people I trust who told me this story. So in terms of documentation, no, I can't prove it, but I can certainly say with 100% certainty that I was told this story by a source very close to Donald.
You do write that he once had a spark of kindness.
Yeah, I think he did. The evidence for it is slim. And what's, in all seriousness, what's tragic about it to me is that I think he had those impulses, but they had been so perverted by my grandfather. They'd been so perverted by the example my grandfather had made of my father that he didn't quite know how to do it. So when Donald was trying genuinely to be kind, and I'm not talking about the superficial charm he uses quite effectively to draw people in initially. I'm talking about really wanting to connect or be there in some way. He just can't do it. or he couldn't. Honestly, I don't think that's even an issue anymore. We're talking about decades ago. And I believe, and I write about this, the very early stuff, that one of the unforgivable things my grandfather did to Donald was he severely restricted the range of human emotion that was accessible to him, which makes it incredibly...
What does that mean?
It means that certain feelings were not allowed.
Like?
Sadness. Well, kindness isn't a feeling. So feelings, impulses, the impulse to be kind, the impulse to be generous. And for the boys, I'm speaking of the boys now, particularly Donald and my dad. Those things that my grandfather found superfluous, unmanly, a stupid waste of time is probably how he would have put it, were punished, ruthlessly punished. And my dad couldn't change who he was. So he just was dismantled over time. Donald tried his very best not to be destroyed in the way my dad was destroyed. So he ended up with a very narrow range in which he could safely operate as a human being. And it's made it extraordinarily difficult for him to live in the world. And as I said earlier, he's never really had to. So it's created this quite dangerous situation.
The hardest scenes to me to read in the book are the way the family, I should say the men in the family, deal with weakness, sickness, death. Starting out with Fred Sr. when his wife is ill.
Yeah. Yes. My grandfather was an adherent to Norman Vincent Peale's doctrine of positive thinking. It didn't begin with Norman Vincent Peale. My grandfather had always been the kind of person who could not deal with negativity, had no patience.
You call it toxic positivity.
Yes, because it allowed room for nothing else. And there are times in our lives when we are legitimately distressed, we're legitimately sad, we're legitimately in pain. And to be prevented from being able to feel those feelings honestly and openly is a form of torture. You know, my grandmother, who was sick and often and broke bones more times than I can count because of her osteoporosis, was in agony much of the time. You know, she'd come home from the hospital, she'd be in a hospital bed doing physical therapy, and just moving was extraordinarily painful for her. And my grandfather could not tolerate it. You know, it impinged on this idea he had that everything had to be great at all times. And the only people who suffered for that were the people who were actually in pain. You know, first my grandmother, then my dad, and then anybody else in the family who showed the weakness of being human.
Your father got very ill, deathly ill, and you get a phone call from your grandfather.
Yeah, that was, that's the kind of experience that's shaped as much by what happened after as it is in the moment. And I remember that conversation verbatim. It was so striking at the time, but also, given what I now know was the truth while I was having that conversation, I will never forget it. I had been told to call home. I didn't know why. My mother wasn't home, so I was told to call my grandparents in that event. And when my grandfather got on the phone, he said, your dad's sick. Like, oh, is it serious? Oh, he's in the hospital, but it's not serious.